I'm joined here with Jamie Erickson. Welcome to the Upside Down People podcast. How are we going?
It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks for having me.
More than my pleasure. It's we were just chatting before. So you're on the opposite side of the world. What's the feel like? What's the weather like? Where you're at? I believe you're also in the past as well. Compared to I'm in the future, one day ahead.
Yeah, this is a sci-fi conversation for me, I think. I am in Duluth, Minnesota, so the upper Midwest of the United States, and we're heading into spring. Today is the spring equinox, and so we're heading into warmer weather. We actually had an uncharacteristic warm winter, but typically in our neck of the woods, we are buried in snow for 9 months of the year, and we can easily reach negative temps for a good portion of that. We've just been, unseasonably warm, but I'm looking forward to summer. No judgment.
Thank you. What's the sort of temps that it does get in the summer, your side?
Well, it can, we have maybe a week or two stretch of mid 90s. But we have so few warm days here. Our town sits right on Lake Superior, which is the largest lake in the country. And so we have a cool front, the lake effect. So we only hit really high temps for about 1 or 2 weeks. So most of the people in my city don't own like an air conditioning unit or anything. So on those couple of warm weeks, we're all kind of like putting our faces in the refrigerator or heading out to the grocery store just because that might be air conditioned.
Awesome.
We're just not used to the heat.
I love that. Well, one thing I like doing with the guests I have on is just to put a bit of flesh to their voices for our listeners to hear. So maybe you can share a bit about yourself, what you do on your day to day, if you have any interests. And we can start there.
For sure. Well, I have been married to my college sweetheart for 22 years, and we have 5 children. The oldest is, across the country right now, getting a psychology degree at a Christian liberal arts university. And the youngest will be 12 in just a couple of weeks. And so we, kind of a wide spread of ages. I was a trained teacher in the classroom for 7 or 8 years until the Lord really put a call on my heart to bring myself home and be a stay-at-home mom. And ever since then, I've been a homeschooling mom. So we have been homeschooling our children from the very beginning. Like I said, we launched one a few years ago. My eldest son actually graduates in just a few short weeks, and that's
exciting.
It's
crazy,
exciting.
Yeah.
I'm holding the tension of excitement and sadness at the same time. It's amazing how the human body can do that. But he will launch very soon, and I have been spending the last 12 years just really ministering to mothers, specifically homeschooling mothers, and encouraging and equipping them in this thing that God has called them to in being a mother, but specifically being a homeschool mother.
Awesome. And so you've written a couple of books, and would you say you got into that from entering into that homeschooling space? Or is that something that's sort of been like brewing up over a bunch of experiences and bunch of years?
Well, both of my books are vastly different, have completely different topics and maybe target audiences. But the first one was about homeschooling, and that was really birthed out of when I started my online ministry for homeschool moms. I began hearing messages, getting emails from women all across the world, thousands of women. And their emails sounded different, but really the through line or the thread, the theme that ran in all of them was, Jamie, I really feel like God has called me to homeschool, and I enjoy doing it, but I think I'm doing it wrong. I think I'm messing up my kids. There was a lot of fear underlying each one of the message and doubt. I think mothers, in general, We are lifelong connoisseurs of doubt. We have self-doubt about this calling of being a mother and how we're doing with it. And then you couple that with this really large responsibility of not just raising your children, but educating them. And the enemy can use all of that to really try to get you to not answer what God is calling you to do and to run from it. And so all these messages from these mothers began tugging at my heart, and I wanted to be able to give them a resource to say, no, it's not because you are able to homeschool that God has called you to this. It's because he is able to train up your kids. But I couldn't find that, that all-in-one inclusive like book to hand them to or resource to send them to. And so I just began thinking and praying like, God, I can't find that, silver bullet answer for them. Maybe I can write it. And so I did. And it came out into the world in 2019, just before the pandemic.
Wow.
Which is
good
unbelievable
timing. In one way, yeah.
Right. And then, the world shut down and pretty much our whole country was homeschooling. From there, I ended up writing my second book called Hygge, and we can talk about that. But that really came from the fact that my husband was born and raised in the state of Minnesota, which is the state in our country that boasts the largest population of Scandinavians. And I was not Scandinavian, didn't grow up here. I grew up in the inner city of Phoenix, Arizona, which is vastly different in culture as well as, I'm sure you can imagine, weather, going from the desert to the, blizzard tundra. And I felt this, I felt like kind of like an expat. Like I was just a visitor here in this place that I'm really trying to make a home, but I felt like a nomad. And I saw a lot of parallels between how we are nomads as believers living in the not yet, but right now, and this is not our final home. And yet we have to make a home here. And my husband actually is part Danish and part Norwegian. And one of the things that I learned about his culture and his upbringing was this concept of hue-guh, which is a Danish concept that kind of engenders hospitality and comfort and coziness, all the feelings that you want to have when you are just kind of swathed in winter for 9 months of the year. You want to feel this sense of coziness and contentment. And that concept of hue-guh, I began to really see some gospel parallels. It's not a gospel concept. I wouldn't mark the Danish people as necessarily highly religious. Many people have maybe mentioned that it's a post-Christian society, but you can see a lot of parallels between this sanctuary life that they try to build through this concept of hue-guh,
right,
and the sanctuary life that is found really in the abundant life of Christ. There's a lot of parallels that run there. And so I began to dig a little deeper. And so hue-guh has become a real touch point for me. And I've been able to use it to swing my doors wide and hopefully encourage people's faith walk, and also so that they can come in and meet Jesus. As I'm inviting them into my home in hospitality, hopefully they'll be able to meet him as well.
That's beautiful. And I'm glad you brought it up as well. I was sort of trying to figure out exactly how to pronounce it at first, because I was like, is it Hygge? Is it hue-guh? So it's hue-guh. So that's... Yeah,
it's spelled Hygge, which is not at all how you would think it's supposed to be spelled, but it's... And I know, because I am not actually Danish, a real Dane would hear me pronounce it and kind of roll their eyes. It's hygge. But
hue-guh?
I do my best. We're all just doing our best.
Yeah, that's it. All you can do is give it a crack, and then, the intention's there.
Right.
So, it's a brilliant book. I really enjoyed it. I know you mentioned how your target audience is like mothers at home, but I think the place of home is a place that we all engage with. So
absolutely.
It's something that Yeah, we read in scriptures how Jesus shared meals at people's homes and over the table, and so it's this very central part of our lives. But then in the West, it seems a bit disconnected from, I suppose, how we engage with the rest of our lives as well. It's often not this place of sanctuary, like those words you're describing, like welcome, rest, and comfort, and so. Maybe share a bit about that journey for yourself in terms of coming from a different culture and then experiencing your husband's culture, and what that journey and process was like for yourself in learning about hue-guh.
Well, as I mentioned, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. It is an inner city. People often, they're transient. Phoenix is not normally the place you're from. It's the place you come to, for a job or to retire. And so most of Phoenicians are not native. And there really is this disconnect in relationships. People live their lives. They lock their doors. They build giant walls around their homes, around their neighborhoods. There's a status level of isolation. And I know that can kind of paint Phoenix as in a negative light. That's not my intent. That is just the culture that generally breeds in an inner city. And so I had lived there for 22 years. In addition to that, I moved around a lot. In the first 18 years of my life, I'm pretty sure I moved 15 times. And so I was never really in the same house, the same neighborhood, building relationships with the same people for any length of time. And so you can imagine that my relationships were very shallow. I had lived there for 22 years and could maybe count on one hand people that I felt like I could call my friend. And yet, when you look at the gospel is relational. As kingdom people, we are to not just, adding to our friend pile, but really digging deeply into building community, building accountability, building relational connections that really, hopefully, will last for all of eternity. And I was having trouble making connections that lasted for 5 minutes, Then I moved here to Minnesota, and this Danish concept of hygge is really seeped and really entrenched in all of the community. Whether you're Scandinavian or not, it's really hard to live here and not have some sort of overlap into your life, regardless of your national, heritage. And what I found was these people are very welcoming. Here it is 9 months of the year with biting temperatures, freezing cold. You want to just huddle under, every blanket you own, lock all your doors and stay inside. And yet that's not what they do. They go out, they meet their neighbors, they invite people in. It's a very communal culture. And I think it's because this idea of hygge recognizes that, well, you can stay in your home and regret the fact that it's freezing, regret the fact that it's cold, and really stay isolated. But it's going to be cold and there's going to be snow regardless. So you can choose to be proactive in that. The Danes have a phrase, there's no bad weather, only bad clothing, meaning it really is a matter of what you put on as you go out into the world. And, as believers, we have a verse that reminds us to put on what is good and put on the things of the Lord. And that was such a great reminder to me. I just continue to see so many parallels between this communal, inviting, welcoming sanctuary lifestyle of hygge and the gospel. But what wasn't there was Jesus. And I feel like in so many ways, I discovered that hygge, while wonderful, fell short. It was kind of just like a placebo to help people to survive these harsh conditions of Minnesota. But it's a start. And as a believer, I recognized, hygge is not going to be the salvation of anyone.
Yeah.
It's very temporary, very temporal, short term, but it can be a tool. And when used appropriately and with the right intention, it really can be a very helpful tool to be able to start building communal connections, relationships with your neighbors, relationships with people at work, lots of layers of relationship so that you can build upon each relationship and hopefully build trust, hopefully build enough relational, I would call it relational equity, to be able to speak gospel truth into someone. And they will then in turn receive it so much more welcomingly because you've proven that, it's like the quote that President Roosevelt once said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So hue-guh, for me, is a tool to show how much I care and to invest deeply into people so that then I would have the authority to speak truth into their situation and into their life.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love that. I love that Danish quote as well. There's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. Because it's so true. I was chatting to another guest who, funny enough, they live in America as well. They had Scandinavian heritage, and they're saying, like, when it's pouring with rain, they get their kids out, get their raincoats on, and go for a walk through the forest or go to the zoo and things like that. It's not like a barrier to engaging with people around them. They just carry on, and I think there's something really beautiful about how what we put on can really shape our engagement with others around us, and then also what it does to our own hearts as well.
Right. It changes your perspective quite a lot. And, one of the other key components to a hue-guh lifestyle is that the outward life will always affect the inward life. Always. If you think about the fact that, like, when you're sick, somebody bringing you a warm blanket, maybe a cup of soup, that's not going to instantly heal you. But man, is it going to make you feel comforted. And you will instantly feel somewhat better because of their care, right? That outward showing of affection affects your inward life. And I think that it sounds trite to say that, but I think that was something that Jesus walked out when he was here on earth. When he ministered to people, he recognized that they have, yes, a deep spiritual need, and that was his focus, but he often used their outward circumstances in order to have an in.
Very good.
In order to provide for that inward need. So he, healed them physically. He provided food when there was a need for food. He turned water into wine when that was a need, because he recognized, a growling, grumbling belly that is empty is going to drown out the sound of me sharing love. So first I have to fill the belly, and then I can share the love.
Very good. I love that. So that brings up a thought then. Is there a danger? And then if so, what's the danger in creating a dichotomy between, like, the sacred and the secular? So if there's this outside environment that's affecting the inward environment, what's your thoughts on creating a separation between sacred and secular?
I think it's really easy for Christians to label some things as Christian, and then therefore inadvertently they're labeling other things as secular or non-Christian, and we put our lives into those two camps. Well, this is sacred, this is Christian, and this is secular. But really, everything in creation is under the power of Jesus Christ, and I believe he can use anything to bring someone to his name, to bring someone to salvation in him. I think that when he walked this earth, he didn't divide his life into two different camps. His Monday life was the same as his Sabbath life. He walked with purpose what he said. And I think that so often when we divide our lives into those two camps, sacred and secular, what happens is we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk.
Right.
You know, our Sunday lives look different from our Monday lives. And
Right.
I think that what that does is it shows hypocrisy to the world. You know, how I fill out my taxes, which, you know, we could say that's secular. But how I fill out my taxes actually is a reflection of my theology. Do I take God at his word when he says that render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's? Or do I fudge the numbers a little bit just so I don't have to pay in as much? You know, like my day-to-day choices reflect who I think God is and what I think I deserve. It reflects my theology. So I think we do well not to parse our lives into secular and sacred. It really is all can be used for kingdom purposes if we're willing to hold it out and allow God to use it.
I love that. And how would you say that fits into this space of hue-guh?
Well, I mean, it's not a faith concept. It certainly is, you know, if we were to put a label on it, if we're using those two terms, secular and sacred, that would be something that we'd say, oh, well, that's probably the secular concept of the Danish people, because it's not rooted in scripture. It's not rooted in faith tenets. And yet, I think it can be a tool that we can use and employ to reveal and reflect Christ to the world. I think it runs parallel to the way Jesus walked on earth. I think it falls short because it's actually not the gospel. But in the same way that I can invite a friend to watch my son's baseball game, and she's sitting there and we're chatting, and all of a sudden an opportunity comes up for me to share Jesus. Well, now that baseball game has become a tool that God has used to maybe draw someone to himself. I think hue-guh can do the same thing.
Very good. I love that. Yeah, it's a good reminder that like living a consistent life and living out what you believe like can apply to all different areas. You don't have to create a divide in what you do, even in where you go to work or things like that. It's the gospel can shape how we engage with all different areas. When it comes to hue-guh, it's you mentioned this in your book as well, and I'd love you just to expand your thoughts for our listeners. Is it's become very popular, especially I'd say over the COVID time, is people having this desire. Maybe it's been caused from isolation and lack of social connections and stuff, but they have this desire to create these spaces that make them feel a certain way. And you talk about how the popularization of hue-guh has polluted some of its meaning. What's the concern over there, and how, what's your thoughts around that?
Absolutely. I mean, I stand by what I wrote. It has become popular. I would say the Danish people have been walking out the tenets of hue-guh for hundreds of years, but in the West, or I'll say in the United States, because that's my frame of reference, the word hue-guh has really been only in our vernacular for about 10 years. And in Christian spaces, maybe only about 5. And so there is a bit of this anomaly with the word. Like, it's the new thing. It's the new trend, both in the church and out of the church. And of course, with COVID, you know, as we were sort of isolated and sheltered in place and we had to stay at home, of course, we naturally wanted to make home a haven, which I think was a lovely side effect of COVID in a way. It helped us turn a little more inward to the people God had put right in front of us. And we had to invest in our homes in ways that maybe we hadn't. And I don't even mean financially, but just our time, attention, and energy was drawn to home in ways that it hadn't in the last, 40, 50, upwards of 100 years. And so, that's why we had this huge, and I don't know about how it went over in Australia, but here in the States, we had this huge burst of like every woman wanting to know how to bake sourdough bread, and the store shelves were empty of flour, and every woman wanting to know how to garden, and all of these home skills and home crafts and old world industries became popular again. And then it became sort of a lifestyle brand and a status symbol to create these sort of lovely aesthetics within your house of, you can see I have tons of plants around me. My husband, because he's Danish, Danes love to bring the outdoors in. So we have over 100 plants in our house. That was pre-COVID, post-COVID, mid-COVID. But plants were another thing that just went wild and crazy during COVID. And so this concept, this lifestyle concept of hygge became kind of packaged. Like if I just did these 7 things, I would be checking all the boxes, and therefore I would be ensured this sanctuary lifestyle. Or I would be guaranteed to feel comfort and cozy in my home. But hygge is only a Band-Aid. It's a temporary fix. And so I would push back on the idea that you can put hygge on your wall and make your space look hyggely. Because what happens when that beautiful chenille blanket that you just bought gets unraveled by the cat? What happens when the candle that you put on your table to create this lovely tablescape gets tipped and burns the whole thing down?
Right.
Like all of those things are just temporary. Hygge's starting point is an aesthetic. But if we're to use it for gospel purposes, then we have to pull on the thread a little bit harder and know that the end result, what we're actually looking for, isn't a pretty space. Because you and I both know there are homes out there that are absolutely beautiful, and yet you walk in and you feel ragged and you feel isolated and you feel very unwelcome. What we're hoping to do is create an aesthetic or an environment, an atmosphere that really is welcoming and inviting and really touches on all parts of personhood. That it doesn't just wrap us up in a blanket, because what happens then? Well, once we toss the blanket aside, we're cold again. It doesn't just invite us over to play a fun game. That's lovely. But all of those things are happening with one point and one purpose in mind when we're using hygge for gospel purposes. And that is to build eternal connections, to build relationships and to go deeper in them so that we can share the hope of Christ with our friends and our family and our neighbors. And that really is the point of hygge.
Yeah. And so in that then as well, what's some of the challenges that you've faced, or the barriers that you see in being able to build those connections?
Well, I think post-COVID, the biggest barrier, and I think we're coming out of it a little bit, but I'm still seeing the results of this, because we were so isolated through COVID and we did have to shelter in place, and there were lots of societal stressing points and rules regarding, how we could gather. Hospitality just isn't in our muscle memory anymore.
Right.
Even for those of us who hospitality did come a little bit more naturally than for others, we weren't allowed to do that. And so now we're having to relearn and retrain how to be hospitable. Our guests are having to relearn and retrain how to receive hospitality. So we're just real weird right now, and we're a little robotic. We're trying to sew back together what was lost in our relational connections during that time. I think we're getting there, but I think we still have a whole lot of work to do. Pre-COVID, 3 out of 5, at least Americans, I can't speak to Australians, but 3 out of 5 Americans confess to feeling very lonely.
Right.
Even though we're like the most connected generation in all the generations, we can connect with somebody at the touch of a button in mere seconds. And yet 3 out of 5 of us feel lonely and unseen, unknown. And that was pre-COVID. Now on the other side of COVID, I have to believe that number is even greater and even higher.
Yeah. And I think that's the stark reality of isolation and loneliness as well, that it causes this separation from like God's intended purpose of people is to, like you're saying earlier, we're relational beings. We're designed to be in relationship.
Our triune God. He is a relational God, and our lives are to reflect that and mirror that to the world. And going back for just a second, I don't want to be a doomsdayer and say, we have so much work to do. I actually look at the post-COVID reality that we're living in and sort of this lack of communal connections. I actually look at that and say, what a great opportunity. Because now so many people are lonely, and we have the cure for their loneliness. The landscape is ripe for gospel connections.
Yeah, and exactly that. If people can catch that gospel heart as well, and then apply these principles of hue-guh, which you so aptly call tools, because they help and aid in building those relationships. There really is a seat that we can invite people in to join us at our tables in our homes and bring them into our space. And so just picking up what you're saying a bit before, like how we're sort of in an awkward place where we're relearning how to be hospitable, and we're relearning how to engage in hospitality. And it's a bit robotic at times. Do you think that's okay? Like, because when you're talking, I was like, surely there has to be place where, or space where both people are sort of aware that, hey, this is a bit awkward, but there's something good about it. So let's just keep trying until maybe the block just fits in. Or what's your take on that?
Well, I'm not a musician, but my kids play instruments, and I can tell you that they have to play scales again and again and again until it eventually sounds like music. And that's the same with hospitality. You just have to be willing to practice making progress. It's not going to make perfection. We won't have perfect hospitality until one day when we're seated at the great wedding feast with our groom. That will be perfect hospitality. We're just practicing on this side of eternity, but we just keep practicing to make progress. I don't think it's by accident that over and over and over in Scripture, God uses the table, uses feasting and food as a image or picture of what it will be like someday. And now on this side of that someday, we have the opportunity, as we extend our tables and make them longer, and we leave a place. Christians should not be a this seat's taken kind of people. We should be the here, let me pull up another chair kind of people. Awesome. And so when we set out another place and we invite another person, there's just something that happens around the table that really cannot be replicated anywhere else. There's a vulnerability that happens when you and I are sitting across, we are sharing a plate of bread together. There's a vulnerability. There's I feel seen, I feel known, and so do you. That really, I think, can only happen through hospitality. And I think God knew that, and that's why he used that picture of the marriage supper of the Lamb. That's why he uses the Passover feast to remind us, taste and see that I am good.
Very good. I love that. So just thinking about it, like on a practical level, you've mentioned you've got 5 kids. One's off at uni or college. Studying. So how do you help your family embrace it also if it's also culturally foreign to what you're used to. So that's one question. And then the other part of that question, I suppose, is like where there's different dynamics in a family. So you have little kids, which sort of follow what the parents do. I've got a daughter who's almost 2 years old, and she'll just come along with us. But as your kids grow up and then they become teenagers and they go start having their own like mobility, doing their own things, they may not see the need for participating in like those spaces that you've created. How do you navigate through that?
What you model, they will follow. And that starts when they are very, very little. My kids have seen our table extended from the time they were in diapers. And it is nothing for my husband to call me up and say, hey, can so-and-so pop in for supper tonight? Sure, I'll throw another piece of chicken on. They have seen that for the last 20 years. This idea of what I like to call scruffy hospitality, which is the opposite of entertaining. You know, we, especially with our Western mindset, we often think of hospitality as, you know, I have to have this perfect tablescape, and I have to have the menu set, and I have to have the perfect Spotify playlist, and I have to dress right, and I have to prepare, get busy, Cinderella. That's entertaining because that's about me. I'm choosing to impress my guests. But hospitality is really the opposite of that. Hospitality says it is about them. And what will make my guest feel welcome? What will make them feel seen and known? And so I really encourage people to have a scruffy hospitality, the kind that says, you are welcome into my real home and my real life. And by golly, that means dishes in the sink sometimes and laundry that's still sitting in a basket by the couch that hasn't been folded, because we're real people. And you know what that does? It shows my guests that I am a real person with real needs. You know, I don't need to show them a perfect Jamie. Because in showing guests a perfect Jamie, what I'm really inadvertently telling them is that I don't need a savior. Right. But in inviting them into my real life, messy and all, I'm showing them, one, I'm not a spotted unicorn. And two, I'm saying, hey, you and your real needs are welcome here too.
Yeah.
And I think then it's often easier to reciprocate. Like if I invite my friend over and she comes into my home and there's, you know, some crumbs on the table and shoes piled up by the door, and maybe there's a dog barking in the background and dishes in the sink, she would normally walk in and just kind of exhale. And she's thinking, oh, you too?
Yeah.
It's not just me. And what happens in her heart is this: she's more apt to invite me into her home because I have invited her in. Somebody has to have the courage to say, here, you're welcome in, mess and all. And then when I have the courage enough to do that, then I give her the courage to do that too. And so it becomes a reciprocated relationship, and I can go deeper in relationship with her because the relationship continues. So to your question about my children, is you just model it from a very early age. And is it always convenient? Nope. But ministry is rarely convenient. It really is. Sometimes it's a sacrifice, but you model it and then they'll follow it. And I can tell you now, my kids, like I said, my oldest is 20. I have an 18-year-old. I have a few other teenagers. And so they do have a more transient schedule, and there's mobility there. And yet, even though they can go, they often invite people to come. And my house is always filled with teenagers, and that nothing warms my heart. I want my home to be a place where my teenagers want to be and their friends want to be, because then I get to have influence, gospel influence in their lives. Yeah,
very good. Do you think if you had a mindset of perfectionism, so like you were saying before, that need for everything to be clean, the pile of laundry to be folded and put away, so do you think if you had that need, that would change how things, like how your kids would engage with it?
Yes, because if I required a sterilized house every time we hosted, what they would hear from that is, oh, it's just more work for me.
Right.
And hospitality would then equal work. in their minds. And that's not the vibe I want them to see from it. I want them to see the fruit of hospitality, even in their own life. I want to see how hospitality adds to them, adds to their life, adds to their relationships. Now, hospitality will always require an investment. There will be a level of investment in your time, energy, and even finances. Our budget for food in our home is probably bigger than the average person's food budget. I make it a larger line item because it's important to me. But my budget has ballooned for food, but so has my relationships. Like, as my budget for food grows, my relationships grow deeper as well. So, yes, hospitality will never be without some form of work. But there's a difference between the exhaustion you feel from work and the exhaustion you feel from care. It's a completely different feeling. And I want my kids to see the exhaustion from care.
Very good. Just sort of going to a different principle that you have in the book. You've spoken a bit about it, that whole idea of comfort. Because I really did enjoy that chapter of how you sort of related it to the harshness of the Minnesotan winter, and how it's learning to embrace the snow because it's going to fall or not, whether it's there or not. And you had this beautiful saying. I think it went along the lines of, in praying God takes away the struggles of this world, we're also praying against the comfort that comes with those, which is so true. Do you mind unpacking that a bit?
Well, hygge is a very seasonally driven concept, naturally, because, the Danish people are swathed in winter most of the time. And so they have to find ways to not just survive it, but thrive in it. And oftentimes humanity, I'll say, can look at winter as a time of dormancy, a time of death. It is brittle. It is biting. It's, everything seems to be dead. And I can look outside and see things are fallow and nothing's growing. There's no life there. But actually, if you know anything about gardening or growing, you know that actually that's needed. Dormancy is needed. And what looks like hardship is sometimes exactly what is needed to make really deep roots grow. To make a tree so much stronger. When you have a tree that is swathed in those little plastic coverings, their trunks are covered in plastic, those trees usually end up dying pretty quickly because they haven't grown strong under the elements. They haven't had a chance to grow through their struggles. And it's the same with our lives. We can look at our lives and we might be in a season of winter in our life. And it seems like everything is dead and fallow and everything is dormant. But it's not. There's still growth happening because God can use those really harsh winters of our lives, those hard seasons, to grow deep faith in us. Our roots of faith begin to grow deeper and stronger when we have to cling tighter to Him and trust longer in Him. And so I can look back at times in my life where I went through some really hard seasons. But on the other side of that, boy, was there growth. You cannot have a vibrant spring. You cannot have the abundant growth of summer. You can't have the bountiful harvest of fall without those dormant winters.
It's beautiful. And I can almost picture there's this cognitive dissonance within people's hearts who they desire to draw near to Jesus. However, their behaviors reflect otherwise. And it's like a desire to participate in what you're saying. What's an encouragement to people who may be feeling that way, that it's like, I get what you're saying. I want to draw near to Jesus in these times of struggle. I want to grow through through pain and through suffering. But I just find the easy way is the way I sort of just go to, is maybe numbing the pain, or maybe just trying to ignore it. What's an encouragement you can give to those?
Well, the thing that pops into my head right away is the idea that hygge isn't just given; it also needs to be received. So sometimes in your life, you're extending hygge to others, the comfort of Christ, but hygge is a two-way street, and you have to be willing to receive that comfort from others, be ministered to in the same way that you have been ministered. I often can meet needs really well. I think that's how I'm hardwired. It's a whole lot harder for me to say, oh, I'm in need. Will someone please help me? And so that it's this posture of allowing hygge to come back at you through the community that you've built. And that's another lovely outpouring of hygge. When you've invested deeply in people, then they'll turn around and invest in you. And then I found in my life during times of deep sorrow, or even hard seasons of struggle, that when I can serve others, I see the needs that other people have, and I see their sorrows, and it really puts mine into some great perspective. If I turn to my neighbor and I see their struggle, or I see their hardship or their pain or their hurt, it's not that it diminishes mine. It one reminds me that we're all human. We all suffer the consequences of sin, death, and destruction, from that first bite of fruit in the garden. And that kind of puts us all in a level playing field. We all share a deep need for Christ's salvation. So it's a good reminder to me, but it also just really helps put my sorrows and my struggles into perspective when I am willing to serve someone else.
Brilliant. And that's also a very vulnerable place, both sides as well, when you are serving someone else in their pain and their struggles. And then also what you're saying is embracing it for yourself as well, and sort of asking for help. I feel like something... Yeah, go.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like that's something that's really not demonstrated too much or practiced, at least within the culture that I'm surrounded with in Australia. It's not very common that you'll get someone asking for help.
And I was just actually having a conversation with a friend of mine. She and I both serve at a soup kitchen every month. And so service is really rooted deeply in her life, and it's of high priority to her. I think she's really equipped and gifted in mercy ministries. But people who are naturally servers really struggle to be served. And I had to remind her, in the same way that every time you have an opportunity to serve, something happens in your heart and God reminds you, see, this is exactly how I can use you. See how I can use your gifts and your unique abilities in my kingdom. And that might just be, putting food on a plate at the soup kitchen. But I need those gifts. And that is an important, integral part of my kingdom purposes. And every time she serves at the soup kitchen, she's reminded, yes, I am needed here. My gifts are needed here. But on the flip side of that, if she were to never allow someone to serve her and never allow someone to meet her needs, then she's really denying them of the opportunity to see how God can use their gifts and their abilities and unique talents in the body.
Brilliant.
So actually, in being willing to hold your hand out every now and again, because you are in need and you are struggling or you are in pain, it's actually a kindness that you can show others in the kingdom to allow them to exercise their service muscles too, and to be used by Christ to do kingdom work too.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think as well on alongside that is it sort of demonstrates this trust that you put in God, saying, I need my needs met as well. I'm not a perfect person, and I trust that you'll come through. Like you're saying, those people who God can use as well, that he'd use them to minister to our hearts. So yeah, I think that's an important thing to remember, is that we, as much as we give, it's also important to receive as well.
Yeah, we can't be lone rangers. And actually in never being willing to receive the service of the body, you're basically saying you have a savior complex. You know,
Brilliant.
You're basically saying, I don't have any needs. And that's probably not what you actually think, but that's what you're walking out. And that's what other people are seeing, how you live your life.
Yeah. It almost goes back to the whole thing of trying to create a sterile environment and get the house absolutely perfect for when people come. It's might not be your intent to say that you don't have any needs, but it's the impression that you're giving off that, hey, I don't want any help. I've got it all sorted. And
right.
I think we can do ourselves a lot more good by just allowing our humanity to show. And I'm just reminded of that scripture that he's made perfect in our weakness. So we don't have to hide. Which is, I think is a beautiful part about starting to engage in these spaces.
And actually, when you talk about inviting people over and having a scruffy hospitality and not sterilizing your life, as a secondary benefit to, a scruffy hospitality, you're inviting people to come and help and to come and serve. Maybe you're asking them, hey, I'm making the meal. Would you bring the salad? And certain personalities actually feel more comfortable because then they don't feel like they're a burden. And so they're more apt to take you up on the offering to come. They're more apt to say yes to the invitation when they know they can contribute. And so in that way, in being a little scruffy with your hospitality, you actually are you're preparing a more inviting, welcoming space to a lot of people who have that personality, who want to feel like, I can contribute here.
Brilliant. I love that. So just one final question. What do you wish more people knew about Holy Hygge?
I wish that more people, and I speak to women in general, so I guess I would say I wish more women, but I think that like you said, I think this really, the concept of hue-guh really is for everyone. But I wish more people would see their homes as a talent that they can steward for kingdom purposes. It's not just four walls. It really is an atmosphere that can just be, the open door for somebody to come in and meet the Savior that they so desperately need.
Brilliant. I love that. Thanks so much for taking the time out to have a conversation. Before we go, if people wanted to find out more about yourself, grab a copy of your book, or just learn a bit about what you do, where would you point them to?
Well, the easiest place is just to go to jamieerickson.com, Jamie, Erickson.com, and that's where you can find out about my blog and my podcast and my books and anything that I have to offer.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time. And I think it's a great conversation. I think it's so important as well. We all have these spaces that we can steward and be good stewards of. And I think that's a great reminder that, it's a place where we can welcome people in. The gospel can grow in our lives. It can grow in others' lives. And we can really just enjoy a taste of, I suppose, heaven here on earth in being good stewards of our environment. So thanks so much, Jamie, for all your insights and wisdom.
It was a joy to be with you. Thank you so much.